Welcome. I'm going to start off by asking our amazing panelists just to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about your connection with Sphinx Theatre. And I'm going to start with Jennifer.
Thank you, Lesley. So I'm Jennifer Tuckett. I am the Research and Literary Director at Sphinx Theatre. And I have been designing and running Sphinx 30, the new writing program for Sphinx most recently. So I'm going to talk about that and also about our Women in Theatre research today, alongside Sue Parrish, the Artistic Director.
Thank you. And Sue?
Hello, I'm Sue Parrish, Artistic Director of Sphinx Theatre, and I'm hoping to give you a context in which we've arrived at Sphinx 30 and this very exciting programme that some people here are actually involved in. So that's me.
And Satinder?
Hello, everyone. Yep, I'm Satinder, and I'm a playwright. I am also one of the very lucky participants on the Sphinx 30 initiative. I was nominated by Carly Theatre, with whom I've had a relationship for very many years. And so it's a joy and a privilege to have been a part of this programme.
That's my mic. And April.
Yeah, I've been involved with Sphinx for a long time. I mean, early in the 90s, I was commissioned to write a play about the first actresses, and I wrote a play called Playhouse Creatures, and that was that's how my relationship with Sphinx began.
Fantastic. So I'm sure you'll all agree, really interesting group of people. But let's start off by finding out just a little bit more about Sphinx and its history and what this is all about. So, Sue.
Right. Okay. I'm sorry, guys. This is a long history. I will try and make it as painless as possible. But there are steps in our journey to where we are now that are quite important and quite interesting. So this is the 30th year of Sphinx Theatre. However, it was relaunched from the Women's Theatre Group, which was actually launched in 1973. And many of you will not have been alive at that time, but I was. I wasn't part of Women's Theatre Group. But so this is a long, feminist, well-established, possibly longest established theatre initiative and company. And I was incredibly proud to be invited to be the artistic director in 1990. However, you know, as some of you may remember, the kind of feminist world was going through many up and downs, as it has now, and it was quite turbulent. And we needed to break new ground, which is what I was there for. And my own history, which I think is slightly important, was that I had been part of something called the Conference of Women Theatre Directors and Administrators from about 1979, and had commissioned the very first survey into women artists in the theatre in 1982. And in 1982, I will tell you that the most produced writer was Agatha Christie. If you can imagine a theatre world in which there were 22 productions of Agatha Christie in one year, then I think you get a picture of what the theatre world was like at that time. My vision has always been about writers, and that and my experience with the Women's Playhouse Trust is what I brought to Sphinx as it was relaunched. Now, one of my first conversations with the Arts Council in 1990, my Arts Council officer, who shall be nameless, when I explained to her what the new vision of the company was, which was to place women as artists at the heart and centre of the company's work, her riposte was, "Oh, but Sue, women can't be artists, women are mothers." And this is 1990. So I think you can now all judge how far we have come. Now, we went through a lot of small-scale touring with Playhouse Creatures, as April has said, plays by Pam Gems, Bryony Lavery, Helene Sixou, and many others. And alongside of that, we had 12 years of what were called glass ceilings, which were discussions at the National Theatre, always on a Sunday, because that was the only time they could get us in. We then became visitors on middle scale touring to try and achieve a wider audience and a wider visibility for women writers. However, it did become harder to sell, and it was quite clear that women were being ticked off as the one event of the year, women companies, or they were confined to studios. So it's always been my passion to find women writers who will occupy main stages. And this has become very much more part of the theatre discussion, particularly a couple of years ago, Erica at the RSC did a big article in The Stage about how women writers were not being invited onto main stages. And indeed, of course, there was the discussion piece in The Guardian from the Royal Court. So it has been being aired, but it's always been my driving force that we should change the cultural landscape. I can't bear being a protected characteristic, and I can't bear being a second-class citizen, and none of us should ever accept it. And one of my inspirations was Pam Gems, who was always furious. She was always furious about it, and very inspiringly. So from there, it was very important to us that we had been evolving something called the Sphinx test, which was based on the Bechdel test. I don't know if any of you can see this, which was a sort of little jotter to remind all theatre writers to think about repositioning their female protagonists and their protagonists as females. Following all that work, we were invited by the National to do a festival there in 2015, which we had money from the Arts Council, support from the Arts Council to do. We ran workshops and presented 25 pieces of work. The following year, in 2016, we did a Women's Centre stage presentation at Hampstead, again with about 25 pieces of work, workshops at the Actors Centre and discussions. At this point, in 2018, we had, of course, we were all galvanised by Time's Up and the women's movement in theatre. And I wrote a very strong attacking piece in The Stage. Thank you, The Stage, who have been huge kind of supporters and for us. Eventually what happened was we got a meeting with Sir Nicholas Sirota and some of the officers at the Arts Council and explained the situation in terms of discrimination and blockages to women's artistic career and their creativity not being invested in and respected. And I feel this still very strongly, and that conversation with Nicholas Sirota and the Arts Council is continuing, and Jennifer will probably say something a bit more about it. So we had a symposium at Hampstead in 2019 where a lot of these issues were discussed, and Jude Kelly gave us a wonderful opening salvo, all of which can be read on our website. And in 2020, through Jennifer's work and the research, was put together for another report, which was called What Share of the Cake, which is still available and does give you the facts and figures of where women are as directors, as writers in the theatre. So then we arrive at today, when we're still in the middle of Sphinx 30, which is this great project designed by Jennifer, which she'll talk about, but partly also based on an Arts Council application that I made between 2009 and 2012. And it was a UK-wide based project to draw in theatres across the regions into a discussion and investment in women writers. And
that's a fantastic kind of overview there. I'm really keen at this point, if I may. I'm so sorry to cut you off, and I know we're going to come back to you in a moment. But Jennifer, I know Sphinx 30 because is going to give us a little bit more detail there. So what is it? What is it, Jennifer? And why was it set up? We've got that kind of background of the company. What is Sphinx 30?
Yeah, so let me tell you a bit about Sphinx 30. So like Sue said, it's for Sphinx's 30th anniversary. And I'm really pleased that Sue asked me to design it. I became involved with Sue a few years ago. Sue read about my research when I was at the University of Cambridge, conducting a research project on how to improve the transition for women from studying the arts to working in the arts, and approached me. And I was director of University Women in the Arts at the time. And I think it's been a really great partnership. I think, I really believe we're stronger when we work together. So it's been really great to design this program for Sphinx. So to tell you a bit about it, I think the key things you need to know are Sphinx 30 is a pilot UK version of the Women's Project lab in New York and the Women in Theatre program in Australia, because I've done a lot of work in both America and Australia. And what we really noticed was there were these great development schemes going on, but there wasn't really anything like that for writers in the UK. So that was our starting point in terms of creating Sphinx 30. And a lot of the program content is based on work that I did at Yale School of Drama, which runs one of the world's oldest playwriting programs. And it's trained great women like Lynn Nottage, who has won the Pulitzer Prize, and much more recently, the Pulitzer Prize finalist, Amy Herzog. So we've drawn really a lot on what's going on in America, but also we've drawn a lot on the research that I've completed for Sphinx over the last few years on women in theatre as well, in terms of trying to create a new model and a UK version of the Women's Project in New York and the Women in Theatre programme in Australia. So that's the key elements. And like Sue said, we're only halfway through, and Satinder is one of our writers, and April's been teaching on one of the modules. So it's really great to have them both here, and I'm sure they'll both talk about what they've been doing. But really what we started with is doing a lab, which has been covering sort of key skills that our research has shown us are really important for women writers to have in terms of maintaining successful and sustainable careers in the arts. So we've been looking at things like the importance of advice from female role models, and April came in and brilliantly gave us her advice. And we've also been looking at the importance of things like having a craft toolkit and business toolkit. And at the moment, we're in stage 2, which is one-to-one mentoring. And we've been drawing on models from Yale, and also a model I know of from Harvard as well, in terms of the one-to-one mentoring. And then the next stage is a book, which me and Sue are working on together, and also a showcase, which Sue's leading on.
I think what we should add, Lesley, is that what makes this very big and very different is that we have the participation of 15 theatres who have each sponsored a writer. Yeah. So there are 15 sponsored writers and 10 writers from Open Call, for which we had 440 applications. And Satinder, as she said, is here, sponsored by Carly. I think that gives you a kind of breadth of the experience that we have.
That's right. And just to flag up, so you reminded me, yeah, the other key feature is it's 30 writers in total. So it's 30 female playwrights for 30 years. That's what we're trying to do as well with the pilot.
Fantastic. So what I'm keen to hear, and I'm sure that some of the people watching will be keen to hear as well. I'm going to start with Satinder. Is as someone who's been participating in the scheme, how has this been or felt different from other writing or development schemes that may have been taking place?
Okay, can I say first up that the biggest difference is COVID. And this is the first development program or writing program that I've ever taken on Zoom. And I didn't know Zoom until I came onto the program. So it's been, wow, it's really been an experience. It's been a wonderful experience, actually. But it's been a wonderful experience because I think we're all, the 15 or so writers that I've met every month or so, we're sort of gathering in our little isolated cocoons, but, we're sort of inviting each other into our little isolated spaces. So there is a real sense of community that I think that's come up out of the program. And I think it's been brilliantly designed and really, really well executed in terms of, there being master classes, so we're getting the sort of luxury of the experience of writers like April and Timberlake Wurtenbecker and Winsome Pinnock and Lynn Nottage. That one's still coming up though, isn't it? And the master classes have just been fantastic for us to sort of compare our own very nascent journeys as writers to women who are much more experienced and who can, in a way, show us a different way and guide us with the wisdom that they've accumulated through their work and over the years. And that I love those sessions. I thought those were hugely beneficial to me. And then we have the craft toolkits and the business toolkits. I think for someone like myself who's really spent a lot of years trying to hone her kind of creative writing voice, it's been a real experience trying to aspire to write for a bigger stage. I think, that impetus, there's an ambition, there's a scale of ambition that is so different to any of the other programs that I've been on, that says, look, it's possible to have access to these spaces and these are the tools that you need to be equipped with. So we've been putting craft toolkits together and also thinking about things from a business perspective, which I haven't really thought about sort of in depth before, and getting feedback from industry insiders about how the theatre industry works, to think about your plays in much more of a bigger context of industry and audience too. What makes a main stage play? How do we make an entertaining main stage play? How do we hold an audience's attention? As a writer, I'm used to writing big ideas, but I I think for me, what I've learned the most is how to push those ideas out and to make entertaining plays. So it's really given so much, and I haven't actually begun the one-on-one mentoring sessions as yet, but I'm really excited because it's about us focusing on a play that we then take forward, and you know, it's given me, and I'm sure all the other writers, what I also love about it is that we've had sort of time and space to develop the ideas that we're working on. You know, we've got the craft toolkits, but we've had this space to really think about the pieces that we're developing. So, you know, I have a play that, a full-length play that I'm working on at the moment, and it's just been, I'm really excited to go into the one-on-one mentoring sessions to actually apply some of the things that we've learned and to push that play a lot further.
Thank you.
Right.
And April, how, you're sort of from a different part of that process. How do you think it's been different, or how have you approached it differently?
Sorry, I was muted. I mean, I haven't been part, I mean, I'm listening to what Satinder was saying, and I'm really jealous. That's really good. I mean, like, you know, there's just, I mean, you know, there just isn't enough opportunity anyway as writers for development, I think, when you're in the midst of a vocation, a career, whatever. And it just sounds like it's been such a creative process for you. And I really, so I've just been more sort of brought in, but I mean, I am working on something for Sphinx that came out of one of the conferences that were held where we all had to write a short piece, and this particular piece just seemed to have something in it, and so that's been fantastic. That's gonna, you know, I'm really looking forward to getting my teeth into working on that.
Fantastic. We're gonna hear a bit more about some of this in a moment. So we've heard so far a bit about Sphinx and Sphinx 30 and what it's trying to do in terms of the new writing, but I'm very aware, Jennifer, that as well as commissioning the new work and doing the workshops and the events, that Sphinx has been undertaking research specifically into women in theatre. And perhaps you could tell us a little bit about what the findings of that research have been.
Okay, yeah, brilliant. Yeah, so that's really been the other side of what we've been doing over the last few years. And we've really done sort of two research projects. So the first research project was a mixed methods research project, which I conducted at the University of Cambridge, which was really about updating statistics and creating a new what share of the cake, like Sue had done before. And we followed that up in January with the Women in Theatre Forum report. And that report is slightly different. That was about bringing together all of the leading recent research on women in theatre and looking at what are the themes that are being repeated again and again in that research. So we brought together the research from Equity, we brought together your brilliant research at the Writers Guild, we put that with Sphinx, with University Women in the Arts, with Black Women in Theatres Research, Era 50/50, and Stage Directors UK. And what I did was decode that research and see, are there repeated key themes? And some really interesting key themes came out, which I'll just speak quickly through. So the first key theme, when you look across those different organizations' research, was that women are facing challenges and that this isn't always being taken seriously. So Lesley, I think you put this really nicely in the Writers Guild research that you talked about. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to quote what you said, because I think it was brilliant. And you said, we have lots of conversations with women writers across a whole range of different areas. And the consistent message we were getting was that women's work was simply not getting commissioned, not getting put on, that they were finding it increasingly difficult. So we decided to start doing some formal research, because as much as we were hearing this from our members, we were being told repeatedly that things were getting better. And I think that was really interesting, because what you were saying, Lesley, was repeated also in the Sphinx research, in the University Women in the Arts research, in equities, in era 50-50. Everyone was being told things are getting better. And yet the statistics that all those research reports were finding did not support that at all. So I think that was a really important key finding from our latest research report. I'll just talk you very quickly through a few other key findings that I hope will be of interest. So the second key theme I thought it might be good to talk about today was the problem of attitudes. So a lot of the different research that we brought together in the Women in Theatre Forum report was finding that attitudes was a real problem women are experiencing again and again. So to give you an example of that, the Sphinx research found women are often viewed as more of a risk, and that of the 31% of artistic directors of NPO theatres were female, that 31% is in control of only 21% of funding, which indicates that women are being trusted less with the most funded organisations, or what you might call the big jobs. So I think that's one example of where attitudes are potentially having a big impact on women's careers. Sorry, my voice lasts long enough. I'll give you a couple of other key findings. I mean, the attitudes ones, a couple of quotes really came out that I thought would be useful to share today. So one is from the Sphinx research again, and these were quotes from interviews we did at Sphinx with 10 NPO theatre artistic directors. And those artistic directors were saying things like, there isn't enough money to make exciting commissions happen, and there is pressure on the bottom line to deliver surefire winners, which often means extant texts, which often means male written. And another artistic director said, the challenge is we need a play that's recognizable, that we can get an audience in with, and the repertoire is dominated by men, so it's how you change that. So I think for women writers, that's a real interesting insight into an attitudes problem where women's work is being viewed as a risk and men's is not. So I think that's something that really needs to be addressed. And that came up in other research like University Women in the Arts and Black Women in Theatres research as well. Similarly, University Women in the Arts found attitudes an issue, and this was slightly different, but I think it's interesting to share. Their quotes from that study are things like, I remember he would talk over us and we would nudge each other as if, is this for real? We let him take some of our ideas and we would complain about it together. They're allowed to because they're men, because they can, because no one brings them up. If you're a woman who's employed and working with a man, there is that shift in power. If you've been allowed to do something for so long, he just does what he's always been able to get away with. And another quote from that same study is, also women can be our own worst enemy. We're so used to a platform full of men only allowing 1 or 2 women to share that we easily turn on each other. So that came up a lot in the research reports. And I think what that really indicates is I think there's a real need for workplace training to change attitudes and to make sure that more women are brought on in different roles in the theatre. And I think that's really backed up by some of the pandemic research that we've been doing. So we found things like issues like men are more likely to be successful at job interviews during the pandemic than women. And also some of the first pandemic productions have been by men. For example, David Hare at the Bridge Theatre and Simon Stevens at the Donmar Warehouse. So there really seems a risk that the problem with attitudes is going to get worse in a risk-averse post-pandemic climate. So I think that's something that's really important to address now. So I mean, those are 2 of the key findings, the problem of women's gender equality not being taken seriously, and also the problem of attitudes. I mean, very quickly, I'll just give you the headlines of the other key findings, which is transparency. If more jobs were advertised, that would really help address gender inequality in theatre as well. Also policy. So if women were enshrined in the Arts Council strategy, I think that would really, our research showed that that would really help address gender inequality, and also the same with the Cultural Renewal Task Force. At the moment, there's 3 women out of 11 members on that Cultural Renewal Task Force. And yet gender balanced teams are found to make decisions which work much better for all genders. So I think the Arts Council and the Cultural Renewal Task Force have really big roles to play in addressing gender inequality and some of the key findings and key problems that the research found. So those are probably the key findings that are useful to share.
That's really helpful, Jennifer. And I mean, and in some ways disheartening that it echoes the research that we did in TV and in film and in so many other aspects. And of course, the issue of high risk is very much through that COVID focus. We're very concerned. And you know, I'll quote David Edgar, who's a great advocate for writers throughout the industry, when he says, you know, this is also one of the few industries where you're competing with the deceased, because of course the ability to do a revival of a safe bet, somewhere where you're not having to commission new work, is very tempting, especially in financially tough times, as we know we're going into. But you know, Sue started talking about the roots of Sphinx Theatre back in the women's movement of the 70s, where indeed, you know, the idea of the personal being political was very key. And so I'm going to ask April for a bit of a personal perspective now on how you think, what you think the common barriers faced by women playwrights, women writers are, and what you feel you've experienced, and your perspective on that.
Just a few. I was thinking, you know, it's such a big thing in a way when you sort of, but one thing, I mean, we've talked a little bit about this idea that the repertoire is very male in terms of, you know, going back 200 years, whatever. And I was just thinking about, you know, Michael Billington's book, I'm sorry to pick on him, but 2015, 101 of the greatest plays, one living writer, Carol Churchill, because, you know, you let one through so you can go, well, that's okay, you've got, and then a tiny handful of women. Well, you know, if you want to address the canon, that kind of, you know, ideological production, you could have said, well, how might we get more women into the canon? Well, we might then think, you know, think positive and try and get, you know, big up some of the fantastic work that's been done by women in the last 30 years and now some more, the brilliant work that's been done. But no, that's one, so the canon get closed. And that's another thing that does is it stops you having a heritage, which makes it harder to be a writer. And women have problems with confidence anyway, because we're in a patriarchy, and I have to go over that. So, and it's a public space being a playwright, so it's quite, you know, you have that on top of, you know, hindering you potentially. And then if you're not, and then this lack of seriousness, I think, that doesn't get you a second production, perhaps. And second productions is going to be how you survive as a writer. You cannot exist on just having a new play produced. If you're just working in the theatre, let's just say, you have to have this kind of sense of your old work being done. And actually, if you're not taken seriously, because there's, you know, I think that that's, for example, I can think of a play that has entered the canon, Blasted, you know, when it was first, it had such a difficult journey, didn't it? It was called Puerile Tosh by Michael Billington, who later then said, oh, I now regret I never, you know, took account of its moral seriousness. Well, you're a theatre critic. Your job is to raise the awareness of theatre to audiences. And what you're doing is you're actually being a gatekeeper to women's work that's challenging, and you're not prepared to give it the kind of intellectual weight or seriousness that you might, you know, just give it that extra bit of attention, which is your job. But in some ways, so I think that's, I mean, I'm speaking generally, but I do feel that, I mean, I know that Playhouse Creatures, for example, I remember one one review by which said, once again, April de Angelis has over-egged her feminist pudding, which was like so horrible in so many ways. It's such a sexist image, you know, that really I should be in the kitchen. And if I learned to cook better, you know, that's my problem. You know, so you are in this, women writers are placed in a culture. I mean, I think things are getting better, and they're getting better because of, you know, the kind of thing we're doing today, and the kind of work the Sphinx has done to kind of really highlight the inequalities. And another thing I'd say, of course, for women writers is what you're writing. You know, your subject in itself. I mean, I once had somebody told me, oh, they're not going to do your play because it's just a lot of women talking. This is the 90s, and you're like, no, but you know what? Most plays a lot of men talking. Nobody bothers. But you know, if you're not confident, or you and your work, you know, you depend on a writer, on your work being kind of given a kind of seriousness enough to be put on. And that's just an example of. And another interesting thing that happened much more recently was an adaptation of Eleanor Franti's quartet of novels. And in one point, there's, you know, I was trying to find a way of showing Lenu, she's a new mother, and the stress and having 2 young children and trying to write. And so the children, you know, we decided would be played, and I wrote, by the actors. So basically a man actor just kind of going like this, and then another, and it's the sort of, it was like my favorite scene, but a critic said, well, this is too disturbing, you know, why is it, and really sort of dismissed it, when I think, well, that's women's experience, you know. And actually this was a female critic, but that's another thing, you know, that you're in a world that doesn't, the reality you might be trying to write might be disturbing in some deep cultural way, because you're presenting women's experience that's always been pathologized. And if you're doing that, you're more likely to have maybe, you know, not to be included in the canon, not to be dismissed in some way. I mean, Blasted, Sarah Kane, you know, she, you know, it disgusted them because it was a woman writing about violence. And that somehow revealed the violence more potently, and she wasn't afraid of it. It was sexual violence as well, and therefore you get pushed away because people don't want to. So yeah, I'm gabbling a little bit, but that's, yeah. The other one, last thing, of course, adaptation. If you want to survive as a writer, but only 80% of adaptations are given to men, and I think that's something about not trusting women with these classic, but you know. A woman's body is always seen as the kind of, you know, the male body is the classic body in tradition, the rational classic body, and the woman's body is the kind of contaminated, pathological, hysterical body. And we're not allowed to touch these classic sort of works. And that is how you also help survive as a writer. So that again is another thing I'd throw in. So you're as well as it's quite, you know, that's the sort of water we're swimming in. My experience.
It reminds me, back in the day I was teaching a module on feminism and theatre, and I had a certain male student said, but these plays are all rubbish, and if you want to see a decent female character, read Ibsen. And I just remember not knowing what to say in response, just sort of thinking, wow, there is a big gap there. About who is allowed to tell the stories of women, and who is allowed to create those female characters, and who can do that. But just to sort of slightly bring us down a little bit, because a lot of this has been quite inspiring, and hearing about the project that's happening. But just to bring us down, I was really fortunate back in the 90s that I was part of the inaugural intake of the Feminist Theatre Masters at Bristol, and I was taught by some really great women playwrights, and I remember sitting there thinking, oh, we're on the cusp of change, and something is getting really, you know, something's really happening, and it's getting better. And yet here I am now, however many years later, and we're still having this same conversation. So Sue, why do you think progress has been so slow in the theatre?
like, don't get me started, but
the answer's on a postcard in the chat.
Yes.
Yeah, but...
I mean, I can't believe that I'm still talking about it either, because, you know, in 1982, when we published the figures, we presented them to the Arts Council and to every theatre director in the country and thought, well, that's it, job done. Once they see the figures and the data, they'll understand. Nothing happened. I didn't even get a response from the Arts Council. Right. So, yes, it is dispiriting to be still here and talking about this. But I think, obviously, and we come back to it again and again, the canon and repertoire are the big issues that hold women back. However, you know, this is not just in England. I mean, it's clear in Europe as well, where actually the directors are king, and a lot of them are men. Most of them are men, and it's until we get this shift where women are recognised as human beings, as people. As I keep saying to the Arts Council, women are people. You know, we can't get over this kind of cultural inequality, and we do have to resist it. Sorry, guys, we have to resist it because, again, in the post-pandemic world, it would be very easy to roll over and let the gains, the small gains that we've made, be lost. So I think that, you know, all of us who are working in this field, we come back to confidence again and again about, and I've, you know, talked to head teachers, teachers of girls' schools, teachers of mixed schools, all the time that girls lose confidence in growing up. Both in girls' schools and in mixed schools. So this problem of female confidence is a central one that we have to always keep in mind and address.
Thank you. And so coming to you again, Satinder, you know, and your writing experiences. We'll start on the down, but then we're going to transition back to the up again.
Okay, great.
So perhaps
plenty of down ones.
so what's been the most kind of disappointing thing that you've discovered, but also what has been the most inspiring?
Okay. So let's begin with the disappointing, because there are plenty of examples that I can pick and choose from. But I really want to echo a lot of what Jennifer and April and Sue have already said. And I think that word risk has been such a big, horrible word in my writing life, that not only am I considered a risk as a woman, but I'm considered a double risk as a woman of color. And I've come up against that on so many occasions, whether it's you know, to do with the theatre establishment, from which I personally feel very disconnected and very alienated, whether it's critics, like April saying, or publishers. And I want to go back to an example when I was first starting out as a writer, and I was part of a program, and I'm going to leave the artistic director as nameless and the theatre as nameless. But I went in for a meeting with the literary manager of the theatre, with this newly appointed artistic director, male artistic director. And it was basically to pitch the play that I'd been developing for the previous few months. And the play was called 1984, and it's basically a coming of age play about a girl who's growing up in a hometown like mine. I'm from Southall in West London, so immigrant community. And it's set against the backdrop, as the 1980s were, of the miners' strike, but also the struggle for Sikh independence in India. And part of that, there was a big Sikh genocide that happened. So for me, it was a play. It's about this female protagonist coming of age, and you've got these sort of iconic figures of Thatcher and Indira Gandhi. So it was an exploration of female power. And I went into that meeting already, you know, sort of to talk about my play, sat down with the artistic director. He must have given me 5 minutes of his time. And it was an indulgent 5 minutes, listened to me, and then basically spent the rest of that hour talking about a film that he had just seen and was breaking down the film with the literary manager and doing an analysis. And I sat there just completely bewildered and sort of like, what am I doing here? And because I had just started out, I sort of didn't know any better. I didn't know what to do. I was kind of speechless. I was in a state of shock. I thought, this is a story. It's not only a story I want to tell. This is also part of my cultural heritage and my cultural history. This is part of my religious history. And the way that he was so dismissive of it, that it felt like that story had no value to him whatsoever, was something that I carried for a long time afterwards. So it was a really eye-opening and shaping experience for me. And I cannot tell you the number of instances that I've had, you know, around similar examples where, you know, not only women of color, the stories that we tell, we feel like they have no value. And I have learned to be incredibly resilient. I have become a much tougher person as a consequence. I think it's what Sue talks about, is that confidence thing of actually just trying to find the value in yourself as a writer, trying to find the value in your work, understanding why we tell these stories, why it's so important that we tell these very untold stories. And so I will balance it out with something good, because it's, you know, it's a counterbalance of where I think I found some affirmation of what I was doing. And it was a play that I subsequently did, which was a play called Made in India. And it was an amazing experience, because, and it was so cathartic for me, because the play ended up going on tour. And actually it was a very women-centered experience, because it was an all-female cast. It was a predominantly female creative team, but interesting male artistic director, Finn Kennedy, who's been such a champion of diverse work and women's work, you know, total counterpoint to the artistic director that I met previously, which is why I just want to, you know, flag that it is about these people who are in positions of power, and the power that they wield, and the influence they wield, and the impact they have. And Finn did get my play up and out there. And, you know, I saw how that play sold out in so many venues around the country. I had diverse audiences. I had non-diverse audiences. I had a mix. I had people responding to that story. I knew that it was an important story to tell. Do you know, and it restored so much faith in terms of why I was in theatre, why it's important to be part of a community that you build, a creative community that you build around yourself, which is tailored to the stories that you want to tell and the work that you want to do. Because those gatekeepers, it's incredibly problematic, you know, and we have to address the kind of systemic and structural problems that exist in our industry, because they cut away at our confidence, they cut away at the value of the stories that we should be telling, that should be enriching the theatrical landscape, you know. And it's just, I find it, I honestly, I can't believe I'm still here at the end of this journey. But you know, I have found so much confidence in myself through it. I don't look to critics. I don't look to publishers anymore. I don't look to those artistic directors, because I know that the community, how important it is that the stories that I want to tell from my family, my culture, my community, they have a right to be out there in the world, and they sort of need to be doubly told, because we don't hear them. And there are people who haven't been listening to them for decades and centuries. So
absolutely. That, on that, what a perfect segue. I'm very mindful that we're getting tight on time, and I know that Sue has to leave us at 2, but I'm hoping that some of the others may stay on a little bit longer. But so Jennifer, the research, you've got recommendations, and there's a survey. So what tell us a little bit about what's happening with this. You know, what is going to make this difference? We've heard some very passionate accounts there of what needs to change. How are we going to make it happen?
Okay, well, shall I start with the survey? Because I know, like you said, Lesley, we're getting short on time. And I think that's a really important next step that we want to do. So when we received the funding for the Women in Theatre Forum, we also received funding for a Women in Theatre survey. And I think since then, it's become increasingly important to do this survey because, like I flagged up earlier, I think all the research is showing, not just our research, but also more general research, that gender inequality is really likely to increase post-pandemic without concrete action being taken to stop it. So this survey, it's called the Women in Theatre Survey. Like I said, it was funded by the Arts Council at the same time as they funded the Women in Theatre Forum. And it's become, and really it's a follow-up to that forum, but it's become much more sort of pandemic focused since then. So what we'd like to do with the survey is to gather women's experiences in theatre, which I think it's really important to do now to prevent gender inequality increasing post-pandemic. So we're looking at what are the challenges women working in theatre are experiencing, and also I'm going to look at what solutions would women in theatre like to see, what support would people like to receive from the government or from the Arts Council or from theatres or from other bodies. So really today is the first time we're talking about the survey. So it's launching really now, as soon as you've mentioned it, Lesley. and the partners are, like I said, it was funded as a package. So the partners are the same partners as the Women in Theatre Forum. So the partners on the survey are the Writers Guild with the brilliant Lesley, the Equity, Sphinx, University Women in the Arts, Era 50/50, Black Women in Theatre and Stage Directors UK, all committed to disseminating this survey. So we hope it will have a really high uptake, because the more women who complete the survey, the more we can use the findings to say there really needs to be action taken, and these are the areas that action needs to be taken on. And also these are the solutions that women want to see. This is what we're being told. So the link to the survey, and I don't know if it's possible for someone to put this into the chat as well, but just to tell you verbally, it's surveymonkey.com/r, the letter R, /Women in Theatre Survey, all one word. So just to say that again, it's surveymonkey.com/r, the letter R, /Women in Theatre Survey. So hopefully someone will be able to write.
That's in the chat now. It's there in the chat. And what we will do as well, just so you know, is everyone who registered for this event will follow up. We'll pop that link in there, and you'll be able to get it in other places as well.
Oh. Brilliant. So yeah, please fill the survey in, because we're meeting with the Arts Council in April. You know, it will be really important evidence for that. We'll give it to the UK government, because we are continually harassing Oliver Dowden and the Cultural Renewal Task Force and Neil Mendoza. So that will be real important evidence we can give to them. Also, you know, we will disseminate the findings to theatres and to funding bodies and other policy makers. So the more people who complete it, you know, the more we can really make the case for action. So yeah, so that's our next step.
Fantastic. And I know, say, we're almost at 2 o'clock. I know that some people in the chat are asking if people have got questions. How we deal with them is if you pop them in the chat, and if we can, we'll put them to members of the panel. But perhaps a quick reflection from Sue, April, Jennifer, anyone can jump in on this from the panel. What can, in the meantime, apart from filling in the survey, which we're going to try and get everyone to do. What can individual writers and organisations like WGGB do? Now, obviously, one of the great things you can do to support equality, if you're not a member of your trade union, is to make sure that you join one. But thinking beyond that, so what can people do? What can writers do? What can the guilds do to really strengthen the position of all women in theatre? Because I know that the stuff has been put in there. We've touched on issues in the discussion, but there's also, you know, how different women's identities intersect in order to affect those experiences, whether that's race or social class or other things. So what can they do?
Can I just jump in and say one of the things that I would like to see is part of this survey and activity and campaigning needs to focus around lobbying for investment in women's creativity. How we have been asking the Arts Council, or demanding from the Arts Council, parity for women, so 50-50. However, women need particular investment to come up to 50-50, to find that investment. So we need more programs, I think, like Sphinx 30, to make the pooling of research and experience and expertise available to as wider a group as possible that can be managed, you know. So there need to be specific ring funding from the Arts Council or wherever in order to support particular women's initiatives. And I think we shouldn't avoid supporting that. That's what we need to lobby for.
Thank you. April?
Yeah, I just second that. I mean, it's about resources, isn't it? And
Yeah.
kind of the equitable sharing of resources. I mean, I've seen lots of questions about, you know, questions about class as well. And I mean, the point is that our whole society's drifted so right, you know, the drama's being stripped out of schools, the arts is being stripped out of school. I mean, that's where there, I mean, I started out, there were lots of TIE companies going into schools, a lot of smaller companies trying to, you know, work in their communities. And that's, it's all, you know, we are living in this neoliberal, you know, hyper capitalism, you know, whatever, and that's bad for you know, for women and, you know, women, and think about intersectionality as well, and all the other issues that are just as significant an impact. That, you know, you sort of can't get away from the fact that we're in a kind of an extreme moment of, you know, the state being stripped. We've got very right-wing government stripping. And how does that help women in theatre or people of colour or working class people or non-binary people? How does it help us? It doesn't help any of us, does it? So there's that big thing that's going on as well.
I've had a specific question actually in here from I believe from Giovanni, I think at the stage, for April and Satinder. Is that, do you think critics have a responsibility to actively push for gender equality? How can they use their power, and what needs to change? And what do you think about unconscious bias training for male critics? Is it unconscious? Is always my question.
Seems conscious to me.
I don't know, Satinder, do you have a view, or you're on mute, I think.
Sorry, I was trying to, yeah. I mean, I do. I think the whole framework has to be looked at, whether we're talking about sort of critics or publishers or artistic directors. I just think that it's about seeing a different worldview. And I mean, I had a couple of very savage reviews for Made in India, which were counterbalanced by some that really got it as a play. And I just felt that there wasn't, you know, there wasn't the cultural understanding that I think, you know, people of color, it's almost like we have to make a leap of imagination. We sort of, you know, it's second nature to us to make a leap of imagination, to understand the books we read, the films we see, the plays we see. And it's not too much to ask for that to be reciprocated sometimes, you know, rather than being judged according to sort of Western norms and criteria and standards. And I think that's a real problem, and that's where a massive shift has to come about. And it's so ironic that theatre is about, you know, it's about giving audiences an experience to experience these other worlds, but we just don't take advantage of that enough, because we're still feeding them this same old world, you know, and anything otherwise it is risky and it's irrelevant and it's marginal. And it's challenging them too much, but that's exactly what we require on all levels. So yes, I think that definitely training, whatever it takes for that shift in understanding to occur.
And thinking about what's next for women in theatre. I mean, one of the things clearly from the Guild's point of view that we would very much want all women, indeed all writers, to know is to learn how to value their own work and to understand that they have, you know, the right to be paid and to be paid properly. And if there's anyone participating in this event right now that isn't aware of it, the Guild has on its website a whole range of minimum rates that you shouldn't be expecting any less than for your work, and the rights that you can expect. And if you do have that sort of lack of confidence when you're talking to theatres and you're talking to potential producers or partners, you can use our documents and they will say, this is what I should be getting and this is how I should be treated. So if you're not aware of that, do have a look at it. But so Sue, I know you've got to go, but do you want to give us a final message from you on what next? What next for women? What next for women in theatre?
Well, we have to take over. That's the number one, because what is very thrilling, looking at the plays that we had in the festivals that we did at the National at Hampstead, and the plays that are coming through on Sphinx 30, what is fascinating and what is, I mean, so mind-blowing is the strength and power of women's writing. And we have to absolutely stand by that and create a huge kind of wave over British theatre.
Thank you. Jennifer.
So what next? Are you asking me the same question?
What next?
So I think a few things. So I think that training of the industry on gender issues, I think that's a really practical step that could be taken next and would really help to improve things. So that's one thing I would suggest, the research suggests strongly. I think the question of quotas, I think it's a really interesting time to come back to that question, because if you look at the research saying post-pandemic, you know, gender inequality is really likely to increase in a risk-averse environment without concrete action. Well, quotas is that concrete action. And you know, there are arguments against it which people have made in the past, but actually a lot of the research shows that those arguments do not stand up that strongly. You know, the argument that in terms of quotas, a quota would promote underqualified women. Actually, when you look at the research, what it shows is actually what it does is it weeds out the people who aren't performing that well, rather than promoting those who are underqualified. So actually a lot of the research contradicts the arguments against quotas. So I think the pandemic moment is a real moment to think about, can we introduce quotas in organizations to make sure that predicted gender inequality doesn't come to be. So I think that's something that's really important.
And interesting, and if you've got a view on quotas, stick them in the chat. Go on, carry on, Jennifer.
So just a couple more thoughts on where next and what next for women. I mean, you know, I think that what next question is a question that both the Arts Council and the Cultural Renewal Task Force have a real responsibility to answer. So, I mean, like Sue has said, we have been meeting for a long time with the Arts Council, and we have a meeting coming up in April with Sir Nicholas Sirota and senior members of the Arts Council. And you know, it's brilliant that Nick wants that meeting. It's brilliant. He says he welcomes our research. But I think, you know, that there needs to be at some point, you know, particularly in the pandemic climate, there needs to be that statement of, this is what, as the Arts Council, we are going to do specifically to support women in the arts, to make sure that the predicted gender equality doesn't happen post-pandemic. And I think the same, you know, with the Cultural Renewal Task Force, you know, there has to be that statement of what specific support are you going to provide as the task force for women. You know, I think that what next for women is a question the Cultural Renewal Task Force has to answer. And it's one they haven't answered. There was a question in the House of Lords about, has the government conducted an inquiry on gender inequality in the performing arts? And the answer to the question in the House of Lords was, oh, Sphinx has done it. Here's the Women in Theatre Forum report that Jennifer Tuckett wrote. I mean, that's not an answer. That's not my responsibility. That's not Sue's responsibility. You know, that there needs to be an answer from the government about, this is what we are doing, you know. So I think that's really important action that needs to be taken. I did have, because this is an event with the Writers Guild, I did have a couple of thoughts for writers. You know, I thought it might be interesting to talk about what advice for writers in particular had come up from the research. I mean, I don't know if you want me to go over that, Lesley. I know that we're pushed for time, or if you want me to hand.
No, that would be great. Also, could you just, we've had a few people asking, how long is the survey open? What's the deadline on it?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it's 8 weeks, so it closes in 8 weeks' time. So yeah, please do it now. April as well, so we'll be updating the Arts Council. So please do it before April if you can.
Okay. Yes. So then the advice for writers, go.
Yeah. So advice for writers. I just pulled out from our research specific advice in that research for writers. So these were the key findings for writers. So things writers can do that are useful. So the first thing is networking. So a lot of the research shows that if you have a group of peers, so I mean peer-to-peer networking, not, you know, the other kind of networking, but having a group of supportive peers can really help women in the creative arts sustain successful and maintain successful and sustainable careers in the arts. So finding a group of women and supporting each other is something that as writers we can do. And I do believe, just to say, that I do think the real change needs to come from organizations. I don't think it should be on us as individuals, but, you know, this is just some advice for individuals anyway. So that's one finding the research shows. It also shows that being informed of gender issues, and this is true for both women and men in the arts, that really makes a difference. So having a read of the research reports that are on the Sphinx website, that is really a useful thing to do, and encouraging the people who you work with and the theatres who you work with to read it. That really helps make a difference at having that awareness of what's going on. Other findings from research are, one thing that can really help is having those toolkits, the craft toolkit and the business toolkit, which is something that we've taken from our research and embedded in Sphinx 30. Also the advice from female role models that we've used in Sphinx 30, a lot of the research shows that is something very useful. And if you don't take part in a program like Sphinx 30, you know, people like the director Elizabeth Freestone has talked to us about how she wrote to somebody she admired and got the advice that way. So that's something just very practical that's come up a lot in our research.
I'll just going to jump in there if I can, Jennifer, just because alongside some of the questions that are coming in alongside this is that someone was asking about where can you find networks. Well, of course, the Writers Guild is a fantastic network where you will find a phenomenal number of writers who are willing and who want to share their experience, who want to get involved, who want to support each other. And we're looking, and some of our organisers are present today, and there'll be more updates. This is one of a series of events that we've been holding, and they're on our YouTube channel, and there will be more. And so there'll be some opportunities. If you're not a member, do join us. If you are a member, keep an eye out in the e-bulletin, and we will get some networks going for those of you who are interested in doing that. Sorry, Jennifer, carry on.
No, it's okay. I only had one more that I pulled out from the research that I thought might be useful, which is the importance of being kind to bring each other up. You know, I shared earlier the quote about, you know, often women, I can't remember what it said now, don't help each other. And actually, you know, people like Pinky Lalani, who founded the Women of the Future Awards, has a real belief in being kind, and you can really see the difference that has made. So I think, you know, having that and bringing each other up can make a huge difference as well. But I mean, that's just some research that has come up in terms of advice for writers, but I do fundamentally believe, you know, that it shouldn't be on us. I do believe that the key is the government and the arts councils and organizations to make changes, like training staff, like using a gender lens to ensure that decisions work for all genders, and also ensuring gender balanced teams. You know, I do think, you know, that those organizations have a responsibility to do that. So it's not women who should have to change, but there should be organizational change fundamentally. But that's some advice I thought might be useful for this event.
Thank you. Absolutely. Lots of interest in the toolkit coming through on the chat there. Also a reminder that we've got a range of resources around working playwrights, and a whole range of different things on our research section of our website. So do have a look. We're now getting very, very tight on time, so I'm going to give the last words to the writers as well. So Satinder and April, what next? What next for you? What next for us?
Do you want me to jump in first? Oh, you go first. Do me. Give me a sign.
April, you're on my screen.
Okay. What next? We just have to keep, you know, mustn't give up. You know, that thing about and collective, being kind is really a good thought. And as you know, as a collective, we have real power, and things change so fast when you know, enough women and men who are on side sort of demand that gender, we have gender parity. I mean, it's just I think it's sort of as simple as that. And I mean, I often sort of think, well, if for 1 year, if all theatres reversed the statistics so that it was, you know, 70% of new writing was by women instead of 30%, because we think 30%, oh, it's not too bad. But once you go, actually, but that means 70%. If you reversed it, you would suddenly expose. It's like a Brechtian alienation technique or something. Yeah.
Yes, I think we'll be doing some of that. And Satinder.
Yeah, I just want to sort of echo everything that has been said so far, and I know that for me personally, the Sphinx initiative really filled a sort of a big hole in my creative life in terms of just being a part of the community, being a part of a writing community that I would not otherwise have been in touch with. And, you know, it's difficult to deal with all the issues that we have to deal with in isolation. And it's just, sometimes we just need to vent. We just need to hear each other. We just want to be understood and supported. And I think as much as we can do that for each other, I think that's the driving force that each of us have. And yeah, it's very much about our sort of female community and standing together sort of alongside each other and holding each other up.
Wow, fantastic. What great words for us to end the session on. I would very much like to thank all of our panelists for the time, the honesty, the depth of information that they've shared with us. A reminder that all of the information about Sphinx Theatre, about the research, about the survey, the parameters, everything to do with that is available on the Sphinx website. You can download those reports. They're brilliant. I've read them all. It's really worth a read. So thank you very much for giving your time so very generously. We're delighted that you could join us. Delighted that the rest of you could join us and spend some time with us today. We very much hope that you've enjoyed it. If you have, and you think there's people who would have liked to have heard this or who needs to hear it, we'll be keeping you posted about when this goes up on the YouTube event and on the YouTube channel, and that you can send people to have a look at it there. That's about it from us. So thank you very much indeed for joining us, and we hope to see you very, very soon.
Thank you.